Hi, everybody. We are just going to wait about a minute or two to allow for everybody to enter the room, and then we will get started. So thank you in advance for your patience. All right, good afternoon. I think we may have some stragglers trickling in, but we do want to be respectful of your time. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kathleen Head, and I'm the new director of the Global Experience Office here at WPI. We're thrilled to be hosting this webinar for you all on the IQP application process, and on behalf of the whole team. We're really looking forward to working with you and your students as they embark on their journey to complete an off-campus IQP. So with that said, we do have some folks on this webinar that I would like to introduce. Today, we are joined by the Associate Dean of the Global School, Kent Rissmiller. We are also joined by the Operations Manager for the Global School, Dawn Farmer, our Director of Global Risk Management, Colin Waters, one of our two program coordinators in the Global Experience Office, Krista Miller, our Administrative Assistant in the Global Experience Office, Rosie Alicia, and finally, our presenter, who is also a program coordinator in the Global Experience Office, Deb Fisaro. So I will turn it over to Deb to go over the ground rules and get started.
Hi, everyone. As you can see, this session is expected to take about an hour. I'll be giving a brief presentation, and then we'll have time for some questions and answers. And since this attendees will be muted on this session, if you have any questions as we go along, please type them into the Q&A box, and we will respond to as many as we can in the time that's allowed. This session will be recorded and posted to YouTube, and the link will be posted on our website at wpi.edu/plus off-campus IQP. So thank you for joining us today. As Kathleen mentioned, I'm a program coordinator in the Global Experience Office, and our office supports the Global Projects Program. We're here today to talk about the off-campus IQP specifically, and to give an overview of the application process, and to give a guide to the next steps that your students will be taking if they plan to participate in the program for the 2023-2024 academic year. Almost 700 students attended the Global Fair that we had this past Wednesday, where they had the opportunity to speak with project center directors from over 50 project centers. But don't worry if your student was unable to attend the fair. The Global Fair is just one of the many places where they can find out more about how to apply for an off-campus IQP and about the specific project centers. We have a resources page at wpi.edu/plus off-campus IQP. And students can attend our drop-in sessions at the Global Experience Office in the Project Center in the coming weeks. And there's one tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and a couple of them next week. Students should also be visiting eprojects.wpi.edu for detailed information about each project center. There's project center videos, there's a bit about the location, information about food, transportation, climate, medical resources. So this is a great place for your students to be looking into exactly what programs they're interested in and finding out more information about them. For parents, our resources page is the best place to find information about the IQP process. We recently sent out a newsletter with detailed IQP application information, and you can find that on our website. And we've posted short videos to walk students through each step of the process as well. Also on our website, we've broken down the application process into 3 steps: explore, prepare, and apply. At this time, your students should be at least exploring options for the IQP. They have the option to complete an IQP off campus through the Global Projects Program in the 1-term model, or on campus, typically over 3 terms. We encourage students to dive into eProjects where they can read more about the project centers and watch the site-specific videos created by the project center directors. For a more detailed look at this step, students can watch the IQP explained video on our website at wpi.edu/plus off-campus IQP. The next step is preparing the application, and many students may already be in this step. We're recruiting now for programs running in E23 through E24, so the whole 23-24 academic year. There are over 60 site term options available in this time span, so there's really a lot to think about. And it's important to remember that students are applying to the program as a whole and not just to a specific project center. We will ask them to complete a preference form to indicate their top project center preferences. So at this time, you might want to be talking to your student about their project center preferences, about where is a good place for them to think about going, maybe a bit about what they can reasonably spend for this experience, and if you have any concerns about any of the project centers or any of the travel. For more details about this part of the process, students can watch our IQP Where to Begin video, also found on our website. So once students are ready to apply, they just click on an Apply Now button or visit the Forms library on eProjects. The completed application form is one part of a 2-part application process. The second part of the application is the preference form, and that's where your student will be able to let us know which project centers are of interest to them. Both the application form and the preference form are due by October 3rd at 9 a.m. We really encourage students to think carefully about their preferences. We'll only consider a student for placement in sites that they've rated as very interested, or interested. We will not place them in any site that they list as not interested. More details are included in our IQP How to Apply video. I suggest that students watch this one specifically. It's very helpful in completing an application. The Global Scholarship. Every WPI student is awarded the Global Scholarship of up to $5,000. The scholarship will come in the form of a credit that will appear on their student account for the academic period in which they'll be conducting project work. And it will defray direct billable costs, which are housing and program fees. If billable costs are under $5,000, students will also be awarded the difference up to $1,500, which also will be added as a credit to the student's account. So here is our contact information and additional resources available to your students as they go through this process. This concludes my very brief presentation, which leaves us quite a bit of time for your questions. So make sure that you're adding them to the Q&A section, and we'll be turning on our video and we can answer your questions now.
Great. Thank you so much, Deb. So I want to pose some questions that have come in related to costs. So you talked a little bit about the Global Scholarship and how that's awarded, but can you elaborate a little bit just on the costs associated with an off-campus IQP? We had a couple people ask about that.
Sure. So on the eProjects program page, we do have budget sheets, and they are broken down into two sections: billable costs and non-billable costs. And as I mentioned previously, billable costs are the cost of housing and program fees. And program fees can be anything from the cost of an excursion that is part of the experience. It could be visa related, but those costs will be billed to the student account and will be covered by the Global Scholarship. There are also additional costs associated with travel to and participation in a project center. Some of the most obvious ones are airfare, food, transportation costs to and from sponsors while on project, additional costs like sightseeing and tourists. We call them tourist incidentals on our budget sheet. Those are all non-billable costs, basically out-of-pocket costs. And the up to $1,500 that may cover a portion of these costs will also be credited to the student account. So basically, we are crediting the student account with up to $5,000 and reducing the amount that you would be paying for that term by that scholarship amount, so that you would have the funds in hand to pay for the out-of-pocket expenses. I hope I did that. It's a little bit confusing, I know. So if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to answer.
And there's some questions around how long the off-campus IQP is. So if you could address the length of the program, and as well as how students may indicate their preference for a specific term through the application process.
Sure. All of our project centers are 7-week, one-term 7-week projects. They may differ a little bit, a day here, a day there, just depending on different things, like if there is holidays in the middle, it may not coincide exactly with the academic terms, but they are 7 weeks long. We do have programs running in every term from E1 and E2, which are our summer terms, A, B, C, and D throughout the academic year. And students, when students fill out their preference form, say they want to go to, one of their interests is going to Melbourne, Australia. We have Melbourne running in B, C, and D terms. And so they will individually have to rate each of those terms. We call them site/terms. And so they'll rate each one individually to let us know exactly which term and location that they're interested in participating in.
Great. And then there's some other questions related to that about with that preference form, how many sites can students select? And as in addition to that, does the application itself, do students submit one application for all the sites and then indicate their preferences? Or are there specific things they need to be doing for specific sites? If you could just go over that.
Sure. So the two-part application process, one part is the IQP application, and they fill out one application. It is to the Global Projects Program as a whole. It consists of a couple of essays, uploading a resume, and indicating 2 references. It's a very short application, and it doesn't vary according to which project centers you're interested in. The second part of the application process is the preference form. And what that is basically a list of all of our offerings. And students have to go through every single one of the offerings. I think there might be 67 this year. They have to go through every one of them and mark them as either very interested, or not interested. And those 2 portions of the application process make up the full IQP off-campus application.
And then there is some questions around, once students indicate their preferences, what's the likelihood that they'll get their first preference, or, what are the chances, or I'm going to amend the question to what might you recommend students do when they are filling out that preference form so that their placement aligns with what they want to do.
So I want to make it clear that we don't rank the project centers from 1 to 10 in order of preference. The students don't do that. They just indicate their interest, whether they're very interested or just interested. And so there's not a first choice. There's a group of projects that students are very interested. And we have a very good, probably over 80% rate of placing students in one of their very interested project centers. But what I would recommend to students when they are filling out the preference form is, first of all, to think about each project center and whether or not you really want to participate in that project center, to go to that location. If you think to yourself, if I get placed here, I'm going to be upset, then you're not interested in going to that place. And so don't put it as somewhere that you're interested in. Be honest with yourself about where you want to go, what places you're very interested in. I tell students not to try to game the system. Our process is set up so that if students fill it out in the way that we ask, with at least 3 very interested choices and 6 in the very interested and interested categories combined, then they're more likely to get something that they are interested in, rather than if they try to switch things around or try to game the system in any way. The the students can put as many project centers as they'd like in the very interested category. There is no limit. You can put all 60 something of them in very interested if you'd like to do that. And but what I would mostly say is just go through each one of them and honestly decide if you're interested, very interested, or not interested at all.
And if students do that, it is, there's some questions around the likelihood of maybe not getting a placement, and whether that's likely or unlikely. And it sounds like, based on the way that students present their preferences in the preference form, that helps them to be placed, and increases the likelihood of them being placed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is there any other advice you would give to parents that are asking these questions about the likelihood of placement?
Yeah, the likelihood of placement is a very difficult thing. But we do have about a 90% placement rate overall. Students who are not placed, and there are usually there is a small group of students who don't get placed each year, and it is due to a number of factors. Students may have a weak application, meaning they didn't spend time with their essays, or their GPA and consistency in passing classes may not be very good at this point in time of application. But if students choose only high demand sites and have a weak application, there is a chance that they may not get placed in this process. That doesn't mean that they're out of the process altogether. We have 4 what we call supplemental application processes through the year after this one to continue to place students. So it's not, it's not a catastrophe if your student doesn't get placed. We work very hard to place all students who want to participate.
And is there anything else that students, and obviously parents are asking about this, should take into account related to their application? The question is, how are students matched with project centers beyond ranking them? So, besides the preference form and what they're submitting, is there any other advice or recommendations you would give?
The application is pretty simple, and the students are scored, their applications are scored by our project center directors according to set rubrics. And those scores are what are used in conjunction with students' preference forms to place students in project centers. There's no guidance that I can give about, what can I put on my application to be a better fit for Copenhagen. But I do recommend that students take time with their essays to make sure that they're grammatically correct. They can visit the Writing Center for assistance with that. And just to make sure that they get their applications in on time is a big factor. And just attention to the process, just answering, a resume that reflects their interests and work experience, and that's about it. There's no real key. It's very straightforward process.
Great. And I'm going to pose this question to you, Deb, but we may need Dean Rissmiller to weigh in here. But there's quite a few questions about, how do students know which term to go if they're not sure which classes, are going to be available. And there's some students that have tried to look up classes for next year to try to figure out, how best to preference the terms, or if there's specific major requirements, like how do students navigate, preferencing and choosing not only their site, but their desired term as it relates to, planning for the rest of their academic year.
I can begin this question.
Sure.
Just by saying that I just spoke to a student who spoke to us right before their appointment with academic advising. So if there are questions or students are concerned about how this can all fit in, they're a really great resource for students.
Great.
Yeah, I'll just say that the students need to take some responsibility for some of their curriculum planning. And frankly, students are doing this because they're looking and saying, gee, if I'm away in B term next year, what's available to me in my department and in my program of study that would be available in B term and that I would maybe be missing. So it's an important question, but the students can speak with the Office of Academic Advising. They can speak with their academic advisor in their own major. And each department has essentially tracks. They can say, here's different ways you can go through and complete the major and what you would take in different terms in your sophomore year, junior year, senior year in order to do that. So that information is available from departments. And frankly, the departments all know that the students need to complete an IQP in order to graduate anyway. So they need to have enough flexibility in their courses that they're offered more than one term, they're offered more than 1 year, and that students can pick these opportunities for their IQP and still complete the requirements in the major. It does take a little bit of planning on people's parts, but it's very normal. You might have seen this. If you haven't, you might ask your student about it. It's very normal for students to come up with tentative course plans for their whole 4 years and include the project terms in there as well.
Great. And Deb or Dean Rissmiller, if you can just talk a little bit about the kind of pre-IQP requirements. So someone specifically has done their homework and is asking about the ID 2050 class requirement during the term before students go on their IQP, and what that entails, who runs that, and how that fits into the overall process.
Sure, I can address that. The ID 2050 course, or the pre-prep course, obviously you're aware that it is the term before students are traveling to their project center or participating in their project. It is a social science course where the instructors cover research methods. They may cover cultural aspects of the country. It's the required course. There's also a 1/6 PQP course, which is a pre-qualifying project course, and that is a meeting with the student's project advisors. The student will be meeting with the advisors as part of their usually 4-person project team on a weekly basis to discuss the progression of their project.
Great. Okay. And then there are some questions just about kind of once placements are released, which that's done. And actually, before I pose the question, because I'm just monitoring the Q&A here, this session is obviously being recorded, and we've also put together an FAQ for all of you that we will circulate with the recording following the completion of this webinar. So just so that you all know that we'll be providing you with more information for you to be able to reference beyond just today. But back to the questions, there's some questions around, if a student gets placed, but maybe has a change of plans or can no longer travel for whatever reason, or maybe doesn't want that placement. How does that process work?
Okay, so on around, I think it's December 20th this year, students will be notified through e-projects of their placement in the Global Projects program. And they have at that point two options, either to accept the placement or to decline the placement. And that commitment and acceptance or decline needs to be done by January 17th. And the way to accept or decline a program is to go into eProjects and complete a participant statement of agreement. And one of the first questions that this agreement asks is whether you're accepting the placement or declining. If you accept, there's a long list of things to sign off on as part of our agreement to participate in the Global Projects program. If students are declining, they're taken out of that form and they're considered to have declined their placement. They cannot just ask to be switched into another placement at that time. They're not put on a waiting list. However, once all the commitments and declines have come in, usually about the beginning of February, we take a look at our programs and see where we still have openings, where either students declined their placement or we didn't fill them in the actual application process. And we start another application process. We call it our February supplemental application process. And an email goes out to all undergraduates, notifying them of what programs have openings and with instructions on exactly how they can apply for those openings. So if your student is not happy or can't participate in their initial placement, they still have opportunities to change their placement. Students, I just want to caution that preparation is key to being happy with your placement. If sometimes parents and students have come to me after a student is placed and tell me, my student cannot travel to this place because they're allergic, they have an allergy to nuts and they can't avoid it in this place, or they have other allergies and this would be a bad place, or they need help with medical and this particular place, the access to the kind of medical services they need is not available. That's where preparation comes in. If your student has an allergy, they should contact our office and talk to us about what are the appropriate project centers that they should be looking at and ones that are probably going to be problematic for them. Same if they have any kind of accommodations, dietary needs, or medical needs. So planning up front and coming to our office and talking with us about those needs may save some disappointment when placement time rolls around.
Great, thank you. And then there's a couple questions about whether or not we would, not run a program, or if enrollment impacts whether or not we would run a project site or not. So do we require a certain number of students to be able to run the sites, or does that not apply in our case?
Kent, do you want to take that one? That's kind of in your area.
Sure. We have so many students that really isn't a problem. We certainly try to expand the capacity of the program to meet all the student demand. If the students are actually completing the application correctly and they're indicating at least 3 or more places they really desire to go and another 3 or more that they're willing to go, then we won't have difficulty really placing them in the program. If the students are flexible, that will happen. We do occasionally have some enrollment problems with some of our humanities off-campus programming, where we might have only 4 or 5 or 6 students apply to participate in a summer immersion, language immersion program, for example. In most cases, we've operated those programs anyway, if the faculty were willing to do that. So it's been a very unusual situation in which a lack of enrollment will mean that we won't actually operate the program. I will say in the weeds here, we sort of changed the capacity at the Worcester Community Project Center based a little bit on enrollments, but the students are all still able to complete a project at that center if they want to.
Great. Quite a few people have asked, have noted that parents are unable to access e-projects to see the project center information and the types of projects that are offered at each of the various sites. Is there a place, Deb, perhaps where they may be able to see some of the information about the project centers and projects at each site?
Not that I can think of offhand. No, the e-projects is it's a in-house program, and it's used for every aspect of projects, from application and recruitment, all the way through the final sign off on the projects. So it is login protected. But if you wanted to Zoom with your student and the student could take you through e-projects with them, that might be one way for the parents and students to talk about the different project centers and what's available, and how what the parent feels about the programs, and talk about the costs and different aspects of the program. So I would suggest that if your student is willing to do that with you. Other than that, I don't think that there's anything available with that depth of information on the projects. No.
Let me weigh in on that because I think that's an interesting question as well. First of all, as Deb just indicated, even if you're not present with your student, if you could set up a Zoom meeting and the student could log in to e-projects and do a screen share and show you what's on there and show you around the different project sites. That would be a short-term answer. In the longer term, I'm sensitive to the issue. It comes up enough that parents are looking for access to that. It comes up, in fact, that sometimes people who are not enrolled currently at WPI, they may be on medical leave, for example, are looking to access some of that information. So I'm thinking now, I don't know if this is technically possible, but I'm thinking now that we might be able to set up a public portion or like a parent portal into e-projects that would allow some access to the information, but would not allow all the functionality that the students and the staff have in working with it. I can look into that with our IT people, but I'm sure it would take some months or longer if we were to reconfigure it in that fashion.
Great. I'm just going to backtrack a little bit to answer some questions around whether or not, so the question is, are all students automatically considered for the global scholarship, or do they need to apply separately for the benefit of the group? Can you address that, Deb?
Sure. No, your student coming into WPI, your student would be, not sure if awarded the global scholarship is the correct word, but your student has access to the global scholarship if they participate in a global projects program project. And that can be an IQP project, an MQP project, or an HUA project. They do not have to apply for it. They do not have to indicate in any way that they're going to be using it. When the Office of Financial Services knows that a student is going on off-campus project through the Global Projects Program, they will put the global scholarship towards the student's project. So
Great.
There's really nothing that the student has to do to get that scholarship money.
Great. And since we do have the benefit of having our Director of Global Risk Management here with us, I am seeing just some questions around, how emergencies are handled while students are away on their off-campus IQPs, as well as just what protocols we're using for when we're setting up these sites. And so if Colin, if you can just weigh in on some of that for the group. I'm seeing a couple of questions about that. Just
Thank
kind
you.
of overall, safety in our approach to our off-campus programming.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. I see some questions coming in as well. I was just typing response. The question in particular was, how are emergency handled on site? So prior to going on site to their IQP, they will have received pre-departure orientations, various online trainings, and once they arrive, they will receive an on-site orientation as well. We have typically 2 advisors going with each cohort, so they might be their immediate point of contact. We also have a 24/7 duty officer phone that is rotated amongst this staff and I can handle emergencies. We also have a third-party safety and security provider, International SOS, that can also handle emergency situations. I hope that answers some of the questions, and I'll
Great.
continue to respond to them in the chat.
Great. Excellent. There is a question about, some students are looking at the information that's listed in e-projects, and not all of them have estimated cost information. Do we know when that, Deb, do we know when that will, or Krista, I guess, when that will be published?
It's still coming in. Some of I think there was a little bit of a delay this year because the academic calendar, there are changes being made to the academic calendar. And so the academic calendar for the 23-24 academic year is not published yet. So a lot of project center directors are waiting for those dates to come out, but they are all working on securing the housing and housing costs and estimating the out-of-pocket expenses. So they're coming in on a daily basis, and we do update e-projects as they come in. So what I would suggest is, if there is not a cost associated with the term that you're looking at or your student is looking at, then the budgets for last year are still on e-projects for those project centers, and the costs are probably in I'd say almost all of cases just maybe a couple $100 more, if that. Last year's are probably a very good estimate for what this year's will be.
I'd like to add a little bit to that, just in asking for some patience. Some of these locations, like Cape Town, South Africa, and Namibia, in Windhoek, Namibia, and in Greece and Albania, for example, Armenia. Because of the pandemic, we have not been able to travel to some of these locations for a couple of years. So at the moment, we're trying to go back to housing providers that we haven't worked with maybe since 2019, 2020 academic year, to really reestablish connections with them, look over how costs have changed since the last time we were able to actually be living in some of these communities. And we have center directors, again, for each of these programs with the responsibility to make these cost estimates. We expect, frankly, that housing costs will not decrease anywhere, but are likely to increase in many of these locations, not by thousands of dollars, but be going up. We're also quite aware that airfare costs have been really volatile lately and seem to be coming down, but we've seen some high airfare costs, and we don't necessarily want to publish very expensive airfares and discourage people. I think we don't have any particular insight into how those costs might change over the next year. And so we want people to understand that we're really trying to estimate costs. We're also trying to estimate costs for programs that won't start maybe until March 2024. And we have a little less certainty in an inflation environment around what those actual costs will be when we get closer to that time to depart.
Great, thank you. There are some questions that I'm seeing, or a couple questions about, distinguishing or between domestic and overseas sites, and some folks are asking about, if students include US locations as part of their preferences in addition to overseas sites, how are those taken into account? And is it true perhaps that if someone's providing a US location on their preference form in the very interested category, that it's more likely that will kind of override their choice, their option to go abroad?
That's a good question. Yes, is the answer to that one. For the most part. What our placement process does, and it's an algorithm that we use in conjunction with faculty scoring of applications, and there's a few things that go into it, but one of the, and with student preferences being the main driver of the algorithm, but I guess I lost my train of thought. Can you just refresh me, Kathleen?
Yeah, just related to preferencing US sites and
Right.
and overseas sites.
So what happens is the demand for international sites is much greater than the demand for domestic sites. And so when a student ranks a domestic site as very interested, then to optimize for the program as a whole, we're going to put that student in that domestic site in which they've expressed interest. So yes, that will happen if a student does, with the exception of Hawaii. Hawaii is a domestic site that does not work in the same way. It is a very high demand site. And so if you put Hawaii, you're not going to just get placed in Hawaii because it is such a high demand. But if you are interested in our Worcester based project centers, or any of our other domestic sites, maybe with the exception of Glacier also, then most likely you will be placed in a domestic site. So I would suggest, and I do suggest to any student asking, if you do not want to travel domestically, if you want to have an international IQP, do not include domestic sites in your preference form.
Yep. And there's some question just about kind of what's included in the cost. I know we're talking costs. One question is housing assured for each project? And the answer to that is yes. And I wanted to make sure we answered that live. That part of the billable cost, probably the biggest part of the billable cost, is the housing for each project center and program that we run. So housing is assured for, so students are not responsible for obtaining housing at any location. So I just wanted to make sure we answered that live. And then there is some question about meals and meal costs, and so Deb, if you could just go over again, just I guess clarifying the perhaps out-of-pocket costs versus billable costs and program fees.
Right. For the most part, food is an out-of-pocket cost for almost all of our project centers. There are a few project centers that do have meal plans, and they may be included in the billable costs. I don't know individually, which programs are which, but there are some with meal plans that would be included in billable costs. For the most part, though, food is an out-of-pocket expense.
And then just related to that, so flights, we just want to clarify that students are responsible for purchasing flights on their own. We provide guidance on that, and there was a question about whether or not students travel in groups. That's kind of up to them. We encourage that, but students would purchase and coordinate their flights and then provide that information to us.
I'm also just want to clarify a little bit about the housing costs as well. If your student is in on-campus housing, they will continue to pay for on-campus housing while they are on project, in addition to the project housing. just, I know it seems kind of a lot to be paying for both housing, but in order for the student to continue to be in WP housing for the complete term, they need to be paying for that as well while they're on campus.
Great. There is another question just about which sites are considered the high demand sites.
Sure. Our European sites are pretty high demand, pretty much Copenhagen, Berlin, London. The English speaking sites, Melbourne, Wellington, New Zealand. Those are also high demand. Hawaii, like I said before, as a domestic site, Glacier is fairly high demand. I would say that those are the sites that Cape Town is fairly high demand as well.
Great. And do you mind just reminding, and we are we're close to the top of the hour, so please feel free to continue to submit your questions and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. For the benefit of the group, can you just remind folks, you know, of the upcoming drop-in sessions for their students to be able to attend?
Oh, sure. Yep. I think if I can go back to my
And I will just say, while Deb is moving through providing this information, students are always welcome to visit visit us. We're right in the middle of campus in the project center, right in the building, right by the fountain, as well as, emailing us at global@wpi.edu to schedule an individual appointment. So your students are not restricted to these, 3 dates and periods of time, but we have, these are kind of like our office hours. Interesting question. Opposite of high demand sites, are there sites considered to be low demand where you're more likely to get a placement? I would imagine some of our domestic sites.
Yeah, the domestic sites, you'll be more likely to get a placement if you choose. We run a number of terms of the Worcester Project Center, which is not, well, it's not high demand at this point in time, but later in the year when a lot of students end up looking for something a little bit closer to home sometimes, and Worcester does fill up, but at this time it's not as high demand. We have a water resource outreach project center, which is the students would be living in the same housing that they live in when they are on campus, or if they have off-campus housing, and most of the projects take place in the Worcester area. So that's another one that's kind of low demand. If your student has language, Spanish language specifically, Cuenca, Ecuador, and Paraguay are not as popular as some of our other project centers because they require Spanish language. So if your student wants to practice their Spanish speaking, those are 2 really good options for them.
Great. There are some questions also just about the humanities program, the HUA program. So if you could just briefly direct folks to when and where they might be able to find more information about that.
Yes. So the HUA programs are, we sort of market them towards the sophomores so that, student could potentially travel in their sophomore, junior, and senior year through our program. But students can do a HUA anytime throughout their time at WPI, and we do have some off-campus options. I'm not sure of the exact website. Let me just see if I can find that. I don't know if I can right now. Yeah, it's, if you go onto wpi.edu and project-based learning, I believe you can find, and or global projects program, you can find a link to the HUA page, a resource page similar to the IQP resource page that will give more information about the HUA program.
Great. And then there's a couple questions that have come in about recommendation letters or references. If you could just briefly explain the two references and what might be acceptable.
Yeah, so the references on the application are not, students are not required to get letters of reference or any kind of written reference. What we're asking them for is the name and contact information, email or phone number, preferably email, for a WPI faculty member, and for one of the references, and for the second reference, either another faculty member or WPI staff, coach, prior supervisor at a job, or prior teacher. And we just need the contact information. If we contact references, it will be a brief email. I think it's a 3-question email, just asking them to speak to the student's academic and academic ability and the ability to complete an intensive academic course.
Great. And is there any reason why a student might be denied placement based on their application or their references or anything that they submit as part of the app, overarching application process? Or better said, are there things that students should kind of be focusing on or thinking about in general?
The only thing that I can say that may hinder a student being accepted into the program is if a student is having a difficult time throughout their time here at WPI academically. And that's not to say that we are saying you can't be in this program if your academics aren't at a certain point, but sometimes you look at a student's academic history and it's clear that they need to focus more on their current academics and maintaining a level of academics to continue to stay at WPI and continue to move towards graduation. And sometimes we advise those students that it may be best for them not to do an off-campus IQP at this time, or to think about doing an on-campus IQP.
Great. Well, we are just right up against the hour. So I think we've gotten to most questions, and as I said before, we'll wrap up today. We will be sharing a link to the recording. Actually, sorry, we have one other question as it relates to health and safety. The question is to just a discussion around what happens if something happens to a student, like a student gets sick while they're on their off-campus IQP. I think Ken maybe wanted to answer that question, and or Colin.
Jeez. I can't get my face to come up here. Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is not unusual at all, that students might become ill. We have everything from strep throats to occasional COVID cases and other, flu-like symptoms and things like that. We've been able to manage pretty well by the fact that we have faculty and sometimes staff, local coordinators, others on the ground who can serve the students' needs. We've identified in all these locations places where students can get urgent care if necessary. Through International SOS, we've identified hospitals and other emergency services if students need more serious attention, immediate attention. And I'll just say for the most part, as we've been doing this, getting back on our feet after the pandemic year, student illnesses have really not been a problem. Occasionally we've had students who've been in isolation because of a COVID situation, but they've not been frankly, very seriously ill. They've been able to continue to work on the project work and engage with their teams and sponsors remotely if necessary. So, it does happen. It happens on campus as well. I think we're in a pretty good situation to manage those kinds of issues when they come up.
Great, thank you so much. We're at 1 o'clock, but I'm just going to pose one more question that just came in. If our sites have been impacted at all, or if we're not running programs as a result of COVID or kind of in a post-COVID time.
Yes, the only locations where we normally would be operating that are not operating this coming year are in China. And the reason is that the quarantine rules and testing rules in entering China are still quite strict. And the idea, the potential for some kind of lockdown and mass lockdown in big urban areas in China is real. So we are relocating those opportunities. The students who were going to go to China this fall will be going a lot closer to China to get in a closer time zone in Hawaii. We also have had a program in Moscow in the past. It's not COVID related, but we're relocating that program for, I think, obvious reasons.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to cut us off. We're 1 minute over the hour, but thank you very much for attending and presenting such great questions. And again, just want to reiterate that we're really looking forward to supporting your students and you all as you navigate this process. So thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.